Welcome back, everyone. This week we're going to be talking about glasshouse brands and how Innocence never sounded so guilty. If you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with BS. This article is my observations of a podcast I listen to. That podcast being the Mindset Capital podcast episode Here Comes the Sun for Glasshouse, a review of Q2 2023 earnings with management. I actually thoroughly enjoyed the podcast. However, I can enjoy something while taking issues with matters. It was all good until the 1 hour, 7 minute, and 50-second mark when the host asked the Glasshouse team about a lawsuit that they're facing. We'll get to the remarks that the management team made, but first I need to say the following. Seemingly, under the advice of their lawyers, they can't talk about the details, which means that they can't refute matters based upon the facts. Assuming good faith, if they can't talk about the facts, then they can't provide the necessary evidence to prove their innocence or the guiltiness of a false accuser. This seemingly leaves fallacy in all its varying forms to defend them, as we'll be discussing. This is where saying nothing is better than something, because what's left to say if you can't make a merit-based argument? That wasn't a rhetorical question. The answer is fallacious appeals to emotion. What you'll see today is what's known as non-answers, an attempt to obfuscate. Today's piece will demonstrate the insidiousness of evasive language and deflection of the actual topic. It will take many forms: straw manning, ad hominem attacks, false syllogisms, switch tracking, red herrings, and much more. Those are many of the underlying ideas and mechanisms that people use in general to dodge questions and change the conversation. Maybe after today's article, you'll have a more ready insight as to how your attention is being coerced by your spouse, colleagues, bosses, or CEOs of companies you're invested in. Like I said, if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, the facts, then all that's to remain is to baffle them with the BS, the fallacious appeals. I'll start with one of the more ludicrous non-answers. Quote, being a publicly traded you must know that these quotes are the best that I can do, as I did listen to it and try to accurately reflect what they said, grammatical errors and all when they did occur, just to maintain maximum transparency. So, quote, being a publicly traded company in two countries where we are audited for two countries, I would say that people can think what they want, but we are one of the largest companies in one of the largest markets in the world in a very regulated market. People can throw nonsense all they want to do, but for us to sit there and respond to nonsense is a waste of time. And by the way, you know that we host people at our farms all the time. We do stuff wide open. We're as transparent as you really can be here in California. That's pretty much all I have to say about that. End quote. And I have the timestamp here if you'd like to go listen to the podcast and follow along. Something I did not write was that's funny because I've actually seen many inquiries to the advocates of this company, the promoters, let's call them, the analysts, the sycophants, the genuine good people that are excited to be invested as well. I'm not trying to make everybody look evil or anything. Just genuine good participants investing in companies they believe in and industries they believe in, let's call it. But I've seen many questions asked to those kinds of people as well as the management teams directly. And what happens? These people get blocked and these people get ignored. So that's an interesting juxtaposition with the claim of we're as transparent as you can really be here in California. Now, of course, I'm kind of taking this out of context, but the point remains that they don't go out of their way. They just ignore questions about same-party transactions or about debt covenants or debt service coverage ratios or this or that, and then they just ignore it. And then the analysts and the true believers seemingly can't manage to inquire about those things on the behalf of idiots, perhaps like myself, and or for sake of argument, and or other people. Some of these people asking questions are bad actors. They're just trying to stir the pot. But then there's other people asking these kinds of questions or are observing these questions being asked but not asking them themselves that would like a reply. For instance, there's some unanswered questions that I have that would have, if answered, potentially would have caused me to position size Glasshouse into a larger position. But they just get ignored. So I digress there, but I just want to touch upon that transparent comment. So, back to the quote. As though perceived compliance with regulatory authorities, appeal to authority, guarantees the absence of criminal behavior. Enron, Tyco, WorldCom, Bre-X Minerals, Burning Madoff, Wirecard, and all these Chinese pump and dumps wanted you to think that too, just to name a few. Or how about the global juggernauts that are publicly traded like Glencore, who got hit with a bribery case here recently? Or JP Morgan getting fined for committing wire fraud? Or Canopy getting fined by the Canadian Revenue Agency for allegedly growing plants before receiving a license? And let's not forget that TrueLeave's CEO, husband, recently got out of federal prison after being found guilty on bribery and extortion charges. And these are the things that have been discovered. Keep in mind. To imply that they're innocent just based upon the fact that they're audited, as though other companies that have been audited didn't eventually get found out for committing criminal activities, is absurd, and thus it's in that absurdness which makes it a non-starter. Talk about intellectual dishonesty. So, there you have it. Dismissive deflection, appeal to authorities, red herrings on details that are beside the point, and many more fallacious attempts at pleading innocence. Did you also identify the implicit false syllogism that's predicated on a false premise that they noted? Premise 1. All publicly traded companies, and you can remove the all if you don't want such a totalitarian statement, publicly traded companies are subject to higher scrutiny and regulation. Premise 2. Higher scrutiny and regulation guarantees the absence of criminal behavior. That's their implication. Conclusion. Therefore, all publicly traded companies do not engage in any criminal activities. Or, since we are a publicly traded company, we did not engage in criminal activities. Though playing on the probabilistic nature of companies that are publicly listed and audited not committing criminal behavior. That is, indeed, a general truth. They are then insidiously and in a hasty generalization fashion in their second premise implying that high scrutiny prevents criminal behavior, which it does, but only to a certain extent and not in totality. Consequently, the conclusion drawn from these premises is logically invalid, making it a false syllogism due to the second premise being false. You must remember, though, that the logical validity of an argument is a function of its internal consistency, not the truth value of its premise. So when I said it was logically invalid, it actually wasn't. It was just objectively false. Which is to say that they made a logically valid statement, although it's only predicated partially on truth. This is why I insist that you must question the concepts in a statement as much as the statement itself, in order to identify these sorts of slippery incremental progressions of detached statements from truth. I'm also not sure how inviting people on their farms directly translates to not illegally selling into other markets. You can't make this stuff up. They're putting forth a false correlation that's based on a false premise, which is the assumption that inviting people onto the farm and claiming transparency directly correlates with the absence of illegal sales in other markets. This false premise forms the basis of a false conditional proposition, where the implication is that if someone is invited onto the farm and transparency is claimed, then it automatically means that there are no illegal sales in other markets. Inviting someone onto the farm plus claiming transparency equals absence of illegal sales in other markets. This equation suggests a direct association between unrelated actions and the absence of illegal activities, which is a flawed assumption. It oversimplifies the complexity of issues and yet again fails to account for the necessary evidence and factors required to substantiate or refute the allegations. It's a diversionary tactic in the form of a red herring, which makes an attempt to shift the focus, reframing, frame shifting, switch tracking, whatever you want to call it, shifting the focus away from the specific allegations of illegal sales by highlighting tangentially associated, yet for the most part irrelevant topics. But that above quote wasn't enough. The others wanted to double down on this fallacious appeal that doesn't necessitate innocence. Like I said, Enron, Tyco, WorldCom, Brix Minerals, Bernie Madoff, Wirecard, and all these Chinese pumps and dumps wanted you to buy that BS too. Quote, Kyle mentioned it, but it's a public company. There's an extremely high level of scrutiny with all of our transactions, and our auditors are very, very focused. End quote. This is a rhetorical smokescreen that affords them plausible deniability in a specious and ostensible fashion. Like I already noted, I'm not falling for this. An appeal to auditors is a subcategory of the appeal to certifications, appeal to professionalism, appeal to authority. It's a clever de-risking strategy. I've seen many do this. Because, as I noted at the beginning of this article, when you can't address the merits of an argument, you settle for the second best thing. The problem is that sometimes the second option is just a plain bad option, but it gives me a good case study to write an article about. If you appeal to an authority figure, you de-risk yourself. How? Because otherwise you'd actually have to defend the merits of the idea that you're putting forth by refuting the merits of the allegations and ideas others are putting forth. You'd have to discuss the accuracy, effectiveness, applicability, and its pragmatism. But if you can divert them away from that and frame shift towards an appeal to authority, all the better. Now, you don't have to defend the idea. That's a distraction technique in sidestepping the issue being the idea. Look here, don't look there is the spirit of such things. As far as I'm concerned, more often than not, an appeal to authority is used as a shortcut in an argument and is an attempt at fomenting intellectual lethargy and a culture of groupthink in an attempt to usurp objective truth. And I don't take too kindly to that, both on a moral level or a personal level. But I digress. On to the next quote. Quote, no real comment on that because it's a waste of time. End quote. I wonder if that's the defense that their lawyer is going to deploy. Probably not, because it doesn't actually do anything in addressing the allegations. And that's the whole point, saying something without saying anything. The original topic at hand was a lawsuit which suggests the possibility of legal wrongdoing. The central issue should have been whether the accused party committed a crime or engaged in any illegal activities. However, instead of addressing this issue directly, they decided to go the route of a non sequitur and introduce a red herring. The red herring being a waste of time. This serves to divert attention away from the specific allegations and replace the topic with an unrelated or irrelevant argument. As a side note, it's kind of funny that they said no real comment on that because it's a waste of time. But if you actually go listen to the podcast, they then layered onto that alleged waste of time for, I think it was 10 minutes, maybe more than 5, less than 10, something like that. It's like, man, that's a lot of words to say for something that you have no comment on, and that is a waste of time. Anyway, I digress. Furthermore, rather than providing a substantive response to the issue of potential criminal behavior, the response resorts to using a thought-terminating cliche and a dismissal tactic, rather than addressing the validity and merit of the claims themselves. Overall, this combination of tactics, switch tracking, non sequitur, and red herring functions as a subversion of the topic and the issue. It derails the discussion, avoids addressing the specific allegations, and instead focuses on deflecting attention, undermines the seriousness of the allegation, and evades responsibility for addressing the core issues of potential criminal behavior. Formulaically, it looks like this. Topic is the accusation. The issue is addressing the accusation. Then what they do is a subversion technique deployed by abstracting out the level of analysis to something else to address it on, and then you introduce a new topic, it being a waste of time, how you have auditors, how you're publicly traded, on. And then the new issue is an appeal to authority, appeal to emotions, and ad hominem attacks in an attempt to discredit. And trust me, those will be coming up soon. And then the goal of all of that was to avoid substantive discussion of the original accusation and discredit the accusers. And don't forget, they're saying all of this stuff knowing good and well that many glass house investors will be listening to it, right? Which means that for all intents and purposes, They're saying this to you. They're saying all this nonsense and garbage to you. So, how should that make you feel? It's a beautiful and subtle escalation of frame and abstraction of level of analysis, all in an insidious fashion to derail the conversation but not get called out for completely changing topics. Instead, there's a tangentially associated addressment of matters on a superficial level. They're creating ambiguity by obfuscation. What they've done is what I've coined subversion through inversion. They dismiss the initial topic and replace it with a new topic to then address the issues within the confines of the new pseudo-topic and absence of the original topic. People often seem not to understand what I mean when I say abstracting the level of analysis. I mean that people shift the focus of the discussion from specific details, facts, or allegations to more general conceptual or philosophical aspects. It involves moving away from the immediate or proximal issues and delving into broader themes, higher principles, or overarching theories. For instance, soon you'll learn why you might be a rat eating your tail or other people's tails and supporting Big Pharma and supporting the prison industrial complex if you take issue or have any questions with the allegations and the lawsuit. Yeah. How you like being called that? And affiliated with those things. Well, that's not a mistake, as we'll get into. This abstraction allows individuals to discuss the topic in a more conceptual or theoretical manner, often distancing themselves from the concrete facts or specific allegations that need to be addressed. It's often used to deflect or avoid engaging with the specific details or merits of a particular situation or argument. What I'm describing is known as switch tracking. There's a podcast called Hidden Brain, which has an excellent episode on the phenomenon known as switch tracking, and I would strongly recommend you click the link to go listen to it and or just bring it up on your own podcast listening device. I digress. It's well worth it. They talk about why couples fight and why they can't ever seemingly resolve things. It talks about one of the dynamics that leads to such situations. It's really worth a listen. I think it's 20 minutes or something. Anyway, it plagues more relationships, so it's definitely worth a listen. They provide some very basic but all too common examples in day-to-day life. But back to the quotes. Quote, "And by the way, all this stuff in this industry, the lawsuits, it really does make us look like amateur hour out here. There are some folks in society, Donald Trump, he uses lawsuits as a tool for business." End quote. Now this is funny. This is a funny quote. And funny is the wrong word to use, so recognize that's a placeholder, please. And now I'm going off the cuff here, but all the lawsuits make it look like amateur hour. Didn't they counter sue? So if all the lawsuits make it look like amateur hour, and then they're just contributing further lawsuits, then does that mean? Oh, but it's okay. Like it's okay to count. It's okay to sue when someone else is suing you. I guess is the defense here. But then that would require that we differentiate varying sorts of lawsuits. Now, of course, the implication was that they're claiming that this is a nuisance lawsuit. I digress on that, though. Back to reading. Yet again, a sentimentally resonating story as a consequence of the general applicability and reality of the matter. But yet again, that's on a broader level of analysis and doesn't specifically address this particular, unique situation. Of course, they're implying it does. And yes, I'm well aware of nuisance lawsuits. Quote, "Get your popcorn out later when it's time, but in the meantime, use some common sense. It really is a bummer to see how silly think about Big Pharma, the politicians who like the existing status quo, rather than banding together and realizing that 98% of these topics we agree on is acting like crowded rats in a cage trying to eat its own tail rather than working together against the true common enemy. You have to imagine that the lobbyists or the pharma guys who are trying to prevent change in Washington have to be laughing. We look like toddlers in the sandbox over here, suing each other, arguing about stuff, silly crap on Instagram. Great. We're happy. Let's keep it just the way it is. People in jail, prison, industrial complex, weed's illegal, sell the pharma drugs. This is what you want to bring from California to the rest of the country? It's a real negative for the entire industry." End quote. Geez. The problem with these sorts of comments is that they contain elements of truth in them. Another problem is people glance over all of it and only retain what emotionally resonates with them. If you don't see how that can lead to disaster, then I suspect that you've not bothered listening this far. A beautiful escalation of frame in the form of a leading question with all the right resonating talking points. Chef's kiss to that little tangent of his. The vermin reference is a nice touch of escalating the frame and level of analysis. It's a beautiful piece of propaganda that's been used by many. Normally it's an othering phenomenon that has an instinctive repulsive mechanism. However, he's using it to afflict discomfort within the group. The subconscious thought process goes like this. If we're in group fighting, then we must be rodents and we don't want to be rodents. Therefore, we shouldn't in group fight. And them knowing this conveniently lets them off the hook. That's the logical sequence. Here's a don't know how to pronounce Volksschalling. Don't know. It's a German word. Is a derogatory term used that gained use during the Nazi era, characterizing people as harmful organisms due to their nonconformist behavior, with the intention of dehumanizing and degrading them as vermin. The term originated earlier, having been mentioned in literature since 1896, and was used in various contexts at the beginning of the 20th century. Remember that. Anytime anyone references anyone as vermin, you better get your radars up. Put on your skeptical hat. Statements that exhibit elements of groupthink mentally are alarming to me. You as an individual, the listener, are presumably part of a group, should prioritize consensus and conformity over critical thinking and independent judgment, and this management team will tell you what the consensus is. LOL. Any dissenting opinions or alternative viewpoints are discouraged and suppressed in order to maintain harmony and unity within the group. Groupthink handicaps quality decision-making and leads to a lack of accountability, as individuals are hesitant to challenge the prevailing group consensus or to question the actions of fellow group members. How convenient and not a coincidence, since they're the ones on trial. I also appreciate the appeal to tribal allegiance and the implication that anyone who is not fully aligned with the speaker's major cause is seen as against it. This appeal to tribalism and othering can create a sense of in-group versus out-group dynamic. This is when you get in-group fighting. It's a little false binary here and a little straw manning there, and you're good to go. By suggesting that in-group fighting is a bad idea and diverting attention to a perceived common enemy, they imply that transgressions or wrongdoings within the in-group should be overlooked or downplayed in order to maintain unity. After all, that's the implicit allegations they're facing. They are allegedly unfairly getting an advantage by selling illicitly. I'm also unsure how they reconcile this in their heads, being that they've countersued, as I noted as a side note earlier. Which means that they too are part of this in-group fighting and aren't banding together. Right? The logical conclusion of this nonsense they're putting forth is that entities within the group should be given a free pass for their actions, potentially enabling them to commit transgressions against fellow members without any accountability. This discourages scrutiny and self-reflection within the group due to the elimination of critical thought, as though internal accountability within a tribe can't coexist within the broader message of the unspeakable word that I'm not allowed to say on this channel. The facetious remarks they made are a false binary through the use of straw man fallacy. By presenting an exaggerated and distorted representation of the opposing sides' positions, the speaker sets up a false dichotomy or binary choice between their own viewpoint and a misrepresented extreme version of the opposing viewpoint. It somehow suggests that the opposing side wants to maintain the existing status quo, supporting the prison industrial complex, and opposes any kind of change or progress. By presenting this extreme and exaggerated version of the opposition stance, the speaker attempts to make their own viewpoint appear more reasonable and preferable in comparison. LOL. Talk about, now I say LOL, but keep in mind the reason that people act this way, quite often unconsciously, they can't account for how they're doing what they're doing or why they're doing what they're doing, but this is what they're doing nonetheless, conscious or not. I don't really care. But it is funny, but it's also not. And the reason that this is a very common communication style is because it's effective. So keep that in mind. Talk about completely overlooking and failing to address the nuanced positions and concerns of the opposition. Remember, I've used this word opposition multiple times. Opposition is just someone asking questions. Remember that. Someone who says, why are we doing this? Or why is this happening? Like, you're opposition. You're the enemy. Remember that. Just another classic misleading tactic to dismiss the opposing viewpoint without engaging in substantive discussion. I'd be remiss not to bring up a valid idea that the host had. Quote, I thought of it as a scarcity mindset. You have a lot of companies and a lot of people suffering. They see one company that's doing something different and is somehow succeeding. End quote. And you know what? That's definitely a possibility of the whole lawsuit. It definitely is worth considering. Because if you're necessitous, then desperate times call for desperate measures. This might come in the form of slandering and suing others. Losers have been forming beta coalitions to usurp the dominant alpha since time immemorial. Because when you can't warrant the attention you want due to your lack of merit, you differentiate yourself by criticizing, lying, and attacking if need be. And quite honestly, that's all that could be going on here. Seriously, that could be all that's going on here. However, I don't appreciate this sort of softball question in the form of a leading question to help steer the conversation in a flattering light. How could he have not brought up any of the concerns which I've mentioned to you thus far? Bias. That's how. It would be a mistake to think he was trying to have an intellectually honest and impartial conversation. Or he's so blinded by his favoritism that he missed it all. And I'll end today, well, not exactly, but because we're not trying, oh, here we go. So here's a quote. He said, or one of them said, quote, we're not trying to put anybody out of business. We're not trying to crash the prices, end quote. Now, I just thought of this as well, which is why you should watch my videos, because I go off script and it's fun sometimes. We're not trying to crash the prices, but if they indeed were sending product out of state, that would actually help alleviate pricing pressure within the state because there would be less product, supply, demand. There's so much demand, supply. If you can put some of that supply in another market, then you're not crashing the price. So actually, somehow you like, this is a tacit admission of guilt. I mean, if you really wanted to spin it that way, but it's kind of funny. So anyway, quote, we're not trying to put anybody out of business. We're not trying to crash the prices. No one said they were trying to crash the prices. If anything, they're helping prices within the state of California. Yeah, we're in this together, winky face. Not exactly what I wanted to hear as a shareholder. How are they going to gain market share and scalability if they don't ultimately put others out of business? Right, because that is going to be the end result. I don't care if it should be, or if you'd like it to be, or if I'd like it. That's all beside the point. The reality of the situation is people will go out of business, and they will gain market share. Is the consumer base going to indefinitely grow? If interstate commerce opens up, are they not going to provide similar or higher quality flour at a lower cost? And isn't it a point of being a lower cost producer to outcompete your competitors? And wouldn't that force their opposition to some extent, forcing their hand into crushing their margins by competing on price? If you want to believe this holding hands, puppies, and rainbows nonsense, have at it. But I'll pass. There's an interesting thing about winners. Successful people often have a certain sportsmanship to them. There's no point of talking crap when you're at the top. You look arrogant and it's distasteful. And they're in a position to signal virtue. They've already won, or at least are winning more or losing less. They can talk about bringing the community together. It doesn't benefit them to say that they're going to steamroll their competition and eat their lunch, knowingly displacing hundreds of workers. It wouldn't benefit them to say such things. Instead, they're graceful and humble. It's of no tactical advantage for these people to provide a more grim and real view of the dynamics of business. Oh, I know what's happening here. Appeal to intention in a moral grandstanding fashion via posturing. This is why winners always say such things as, there's enough for everybody. because it's a nice sounding message and it's of zero tactical advantage to say anything else but that. I always appreciate an opportunity to observe the subtle moral grandstanding and reframing of matters to deflect attention from the potentially negative consequences and byproducts of one's actions. What this above quote depicts is a positive spin. And may I once again remind you that spin is a form of propaganda, meaning if you bought into the line of BS that they just told you, due to its veneer of sentimentality, then you've been propagandized, making you an ideologue due to your failure to critically evaluate the statement. And you will now become a propagator of the propaganda. Funny how that works. They're posturing via a rhetorical tactic as a morally superior, caring, and considerate person while not addressing and disregarding the actual impact their actions have on or secretively chalking up to necessary casualties and collateral damage. It's not that they want to destroy other people's businesses and dreams, but that's just a necessary evil, if you will. And I can appreciate that. There are some sick people in the world who do go out of their way and enjoy and derive pleasure from defeating others and ruining others. I hope they're not that kind of person. I can't say I really think that they are that kind of person, but I can also say that I really haven't thought about it too much. Just like the hot guy with money and social skills isn't trying to steal your girlfriend and thinks there's enough women to go around, he'll still steal her. He's not trying to make you single and crush your heart, but the facts remain you're now single and heartbroken. In this case, the girl is the customer, and the hot guy is the large-scale, economically viable producer. They're reframing and deliberately curating a narrative to downplay and divert attention from the negatives that their actions are causing. They know what they're doing. They know, at least I hope so, they know that by being a low-cost, high-margin producer with access to the capital markets, that will help them put companies out of business and make people unemployed as a byproduct, not an intention, a byproduct. So when they said, we're not trying to, okay, that's beside the point. It's a foreseeable byproduct. Did you mean not to? That's a good question when someone says, I didn't mean to. Did you mean not to? Yeah, and then you find out the game that it really is. It boils down to omission versus commission, and there's entire books on that topic. The classic, don't hate the player, hate the game phrase comes to mind. Are they trying to help anyone? Of course. They'll say that they're helping fund someone else or helping veterans. Are they sharing trade secrets to help the viability of their competition? I didn't think so. So, then it gets abstracted on a level of analysis that distracts to the point to redirect attention. I already know how these types of conversations go. I've had them thousands of times. It's a false dichotomy to say that they're evil and malevolent or innocent and pure. What I've been trying to do in my publications is to provide you with a Paul Harvey-esque rest of the story type dynamic, or the less covered parts of the story that seemingly often get overlooked. They're also not trying to not put anyone out of business either. If it happens, it happens. Let the chips fall where they may. Blah, blah, blah. I'd much rather them say, we're coming and we're coming hard. Giggity. So, you had better watch out, get your ducks in a row, and get ready to compete. This is a dog-eat-dog world, and there's only enough room for a few of us. This is survival of the fittest, and we're battle-hardened. But of course, people will say, oh no, my precious company, why are they talking so cruelly and naughtily? Why can't they all be friends? Now, you could say that a more constructive and positive revision might be, we're entering the market with determination and a strong drive to succeed. We encourage you to be prepared and competitive. It's a dynamic and challenging environment, but we aim to foster a fair and collaborative atmosphere. We believe in the principle of healthy competition where the best can thrive and bring out the best in others. I love how elites talk about how there's enough to go around and not to fight over the crumbs, which I believe they said. The delusion or disingenuousness required for such statements is concerning. There are millions that only have crumbs. Just like there are millions of people at the bottom of the rung of the socio-economic ladder for one reason or the other, there are also thousands of businesses that are similar. The owner doesn't know how to make good tactical decisions and pivot when needed. They struggle with getting costs under control and so on. Crumbs is all they have. And then to have the audacity to tell them to not fight over the crumbs. That's the same as telling them to have nothing. And remember, this is coming from a person who need not worry about said crumbs. It actually made me think of this dystopian meme. The Great Reset. You will own nothing and you will be happy. In conclusion. So there you have it. Look, I don't really care if they sold in the illicit market or not. Get it how you can. It's tough out there, especially in California. Why is it that Trulieve can pay lobbyists tens of millions and that's okay? If Glass House is guilty, maybe they won't do it again. Perhaps they were in a pinch. Who knows? It could have been a one-time thing or a few times. Or a never time. Maybe the markets are improving so they don't need to do it anymore. You shouldn't confuse a criminal with a bad person. There's a lot of quote-unquote moral people out there who don't steal because it's not necessary. If it was necessary, they'd quickly become quote-unquote immoral. You shouldn't confuse morality with cowardice or necessitous. As they say, desperate times call for desperate measures. If you're still saying, they sound like nice people though, all I have to say to that is, WTF. What does that have to do with anything? The difference between you and me, the difference between a lot of you and me is I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if they were found guilty. And you might be. And what that would translate to is me buying the dip if they were found guilty, had to pay a fine, whatever, who knows what might come from it, or nothing. Keep that in mind. And you might sell the dip. Depending upon how you feel about matters, you might say one of the two phrases. That's what a liar would say, or that's what a truth teller would say. This is why liars posture and mimic truth-telling cues. It sows confusion, causes self-doubt, and after all, aren't you supposed to give people the benefit of the doubt and assume good faith? I try not to give too much credence to cheap signals. I like Zahavian signals, costly signals. I swear millions watched The Tinder Swindler and practically no one learned anything. As far as I'm concerned, much of what I quoted here today is simply cheap signaling. What they proceed to say doesn't prove anything. Neither guilt nor innocence. It's just one massive red flag to me. It's the merits of the idea that warrants innocence, and they were constrained from using that freeing mechanism, allegedly freeing mechanism. You need not use fallacious appeals when there's allegedly enough body of evidence to prove your innocence. The statements they make could both come from a liar or someone telling the truth. That's the problem. The validity of their innocence is predicated on the body of evidence which they're refusing to provide in this discussion. As such, that seemingly only leaves them with making fallacious appeals, and I don't care for that. I'd like to finish this by hedging my statements. This is not an indictment on the Glass House brand. This is not I'm not just saying this for, I don't know, liability purposes. This is genuine. Like, people can't comprehend that a person can make a praxeological description of what is. Just talk about the details, the dynamics, the flattering ones, the unflattering ones, without coming to a moral or ideological conclusion. That's impossible for most people. I'm not being rhetorical when I say that. I'm not being condescending, even though a lot of people will feel that way. Like, literally, most people cannot say this is what it is without ascribing moral value. Even though I've noted I don't appreciate how they've talked in the quotes I've quoted, but beyond those specific examples, to make a broader, more larger, more abstract thing out of it is not something I'm trying to do here, or really interested in. So, I'd like to finish this by hedging my statements. This is not an indictment on the Glass House brand. This is not an indictment on the totality of being, which is the Glass House management team. It can't be, for one simple reason. The fallacious appeals that they've committed are quite human. If I were to condemn them based upon the comments I've outlined today, I'd have to condemn the vast swath of humanity, and I'm unwilling to be so overtly misanthropic. As such, today's piece is a praxeological description of what occurred within the confines of the quotes I quoted. I cannot label their intent, motives, or awareness of the fallacies they engaged in. Most people are clueless about it. They do it automatically and unconsciously. And on top of that, if you try to bring it to their attention and awareness, they will fight you tooth and nail. So keep that in mind. You'll notice that there's no ideological prescription of what they should or shouldn't do. I'm not concerned with shoulds or shouldn'ts. I'm concerned with what is. You probably should know what something is before you start trying to layer on prescriptions and proscriptions. Nor am I trying to engage in any moral condemnation in regard to the allegations. My intention was simple, to illustrate the fallacious nature of their argument. That doesn't mean that they don't have a good argument, which they didn't provide. Nor does it even matter for the sake of this article whether they do or not. You should also note that I own shares. But it would be terribly intellectually dishonest and hypocritical of me to not discuss concerns I have with an investment. In today's case, the concern is with their fallacious appeals. Thank you for listening, and until next time.